Hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds.
I love it. Well, I've got Senator Adam Hollier here, who I uh, discovered in an amazing New York Times piece many months ago. And what struck me was the headline that, oh, this is the guy that no one wants to have a beer with. And I thought, oh, that's so awesome. So I reached out and I said, hey, would you like to come into the Nerd Zone and talk a little bit about what you're working on, and here we are. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's funny though. After that article, more people are like, "I would have a beer with you." I was like, "You said before," but what can you do?
Yeah, you definitely feel like I feel like you could for sure. We're gonna have a coffee together today. Tell me a little bit about like yourself, your background, and then we'll get into your congressional run and what you're working on now.
Yeah, so I'm a lifelong Detroiter. I literally live in the same neighborhood I was born and raised in. So I live 2 blocks from my parents, 2 blocks south of where my mom grew up. I went to Detroit Public Schools. I have a bachelor's from Cornell, a master's from the University of Michigan. I played football in college. I ran track. I was a decathlete, a volunteer firefighter. I'm a captain in the Army. I'm a civil affairs officer and a paratrooper. I'm married and I have 2 little kids. My daughter's 4, my son's 1, and I run them to daycare. So I got 60 miles in August, which was more than I've gotten all year. But it's really been a blessing. I serve in the state senate and have so for the last 4 years, and have been really grateful for that opportunity. I've gotten a bill signed into law every year that I've served, and that's in a legislature that has been in Republican control every day or Senate that's been in Republican control every day that I've been alive. So it's an interesting space to exist in and to have worked in, but it's always been a blessing for me.
That's amazing. How does a Democratic state senator get anything done in a Republican-controlled state Senate?
By developing relationships with people who can make a difference. And so I spent a lot of time going and visiting my colleagues in their communities. I spent a lot of time getting to know what matters to them and working with them on the issues that matter most to them. I think in this world, it's easy to get into the political this ways or like they're trash or terrible people, but that doesn't serve my constituents or my people. So you remember the movie Charlie Wilson's War? It starts out with him saying that he's a congressman from a place where his constituents don't need anything. So he can say yes. I'm like the exact opposite. I represent a district that needs everything. And so I say yes to a lot more, right? So as my colleagues are working on things, I try and say yes to them so that they can say yes to me. And that's been the way that I've been most successful. So I sit on the appropriations committee at the state level and have been able to get the kind of projects that I want funded because I've gotten my colleagues to come down and see them and see the impact that they have. The same way I'm willing to go out and see the impact of the projects that matter to them.
What would be an example of something that you are really proud of in the state legislature that you worked on where maybe the Republicans were initially skeptical and you found a way to get everybody on the same page?
Yeah, so there is this program called Flip the Script. It is it's a program for folks who had been involved in the criminal justice system. So returning citizens, people who had made a mistake in the past, and it helps them turn their life around, like literally flipping the script on the book of their story. And it had been zeroed out in the state budget. So it had been funded for $1 million and was always on, it's one of those programs that was always on the chopping block, right? So I get elected and it is zeroed out in the state budget. And so the department said, oh, no, we don't need it. The Republicans were like, no, it's no good. But in my community, it's critically important. Like the successes and its rates are really, really impactful. And so I got Tom Barrett, who is a very, very, like one of the 2 or 3 most conservative Republicans in the legislature, who chairs the committee that I needed to get through and that I'm on. And I'm like, hey, Tom, this is really important. I get him to come down and visit the location, to sit there with people and understand that this program has changed their lives and changed the lives of their children. And Tom has little kids, right? When he heard a guy who had never had a real job, who is now a welder and making real money, talking to his son about this program and how, his son could live a life where his father was always going to have a job. That meant something in this space. And so I'm really proud because not only did we get the $1 million restored, but we've gotten them almost $1 million increase every year. So This year,
Wow.
they were at 2.5 million, or they're $2.7 million, going from being zeroed out originally. And a new Republican is the chair of that committee, and it was the number one highlight on the correction subcommittee budget, right? So they're like, and we got this money for Flip the Script, because
Mm.
now it's no longer something that's on the chopping block. It is a staple because people understand the value that it brings. But that came from a relationship that I built with my colleague. He happens to also be an Army guy. So he's a helicopter pilot. I'm a paratrooper, right? Like, we were able to vibe on those things. And that's what it's all about. It's about finding the common ground so that we can get the work done that needs to be done.
It's so interesting because when you think about the federal level and the congressional representatives in DC, it seems like we're often sending people who are not great at building those bridges and who are rewarded. The system kind of rewards them for not building those bridges, for burning as many as they can, because that's how you win primaries. um it sounds like how do you see some of the lessons you've learned in the state legislature? Do you think there's a place for that in DC? It feels like we're so far away from that moment where people from different parties can connect, in a dispassionate way and just kind of figure out problems together. Like, that seems so idealistic, but it's not what I see, you know, every
Mhm.
day.
I think for me, it's just flat out pragmatism, right? So the more we elect people who care about delivering, and the more we hold people accountable to deliver, the better off we're going to be, right? And to your point, people are rewarded for the social media thing where they call somebody a whatever on either
Hmm.
side of the space, right? So your Marjorie Taylor Greens or your AOCs who are social media influencers are hugely impactful. When they are talking to their bases, people listen. What we need a lot more of are the kind of people who are going to go out and make the deals. And I think ranked choice voting and a continued emphasis on primary elections is going to make a difference, and on results. And so you've seen states that have ranked choice voting starting to make those difference, right? It made a difference for Susan Collins in Maine.
Hmm.
It's going to make it, I think a huge difference for Lisa Murkowski in
Hmm.
Alaska. And those are just, on the Republican sides. And as we start talking about where that means, it's hugely impactful, right? If there had been ranked choice voting in my congressional primary, we would have had a very different result. And I think you're starting to see across the country the need to do those kind of things as people are increasingly frustrated with the small minorities that have polarized our elections, because the majority of Americans were not at the Capitol on January 6th last year having a coup, right? Like, the majority of Americans are not protesting things in, really aggressive ways. The majority of Americans are trying to put food on their table. They're trying to understand what's going on and to manage these things. And that's what we need to be governing for. And it just hasn't happened because so many of our elections are determined by the primaries.
So, we've only been talking a few minutes, but you come across in a very positive way, as a pragmatic, kind of mission driven, but hey, I'm going to just figure this out and work with people. You're a team player, willing to kind of work with all kinds of people to get things done for your district. That sounds awesome. And I have to acknowledge that you did compete in a primary of your own and you came up short, just a few thousand votes, but you came up short. And I wonder, like, did the system kind of penalize you for being too kind of reasonable? Or like, what's your reflection on what happened and why didn't it,
I mean,
why didn't we get the win?
certainly, if I were a little bit more of a jerk in those spaces, it would have been helpful, because I think people abide by that red meat. I think there were certainly criticisms that I work with Republicans too much in the space, but I work with Republicans not because I like them, because we're best friends. I think it's because my people need stuff and they're in charge, right? And if we were in charge, I would have worked with them less, because they would have had to work with me on things. And I think that's the
Mhm.
difference, right? Like, you don't that'd be like someone being like, "Oh man, you talk to your boss way too much." Well, they're my boss. If I
Right.
was the boss, they would talk to me more, on my terms. But we live in a system that is designed for us to cooperate. And unless we cooperate, we can't get anything done. So either we're going to punish people for gridlock, or we're going to reward them for making it gridlock. And so I ran, a campaign talking about the things that I've done. It was a really unique situation. So I was also running against a multi-million dollar self-funder, so a guy who gave himself $8 million. So it was the most expensive primary in the state, one of the most expensive primaries in the country. You don't typically see Democratic primaries that are costing close to 20 million, 16, $15 million. But when someone gives themselves $8 million, and a crowded field, so there were 9 candidates, 8 of which were Black, and split up the Black vote in the city, right? So it was a unique race and a short timeline. So I had 6 months to run for Congress. Last year, this time, I was not expecting to be running for Congress. In December, I wasn't expecting to be running for Congress. And mid-January, I was like, oh, I'm running for Congress. Is that really happening? Okay, it's happening. All right. And so we're all in. But, I think as we think about Monday morning quarterbacks, right, like there are all kinds of things that we probably could have done differently with hindsight. But in the moment, it was like we were doing the very best that we could. I'd never run for Congress before, and I'd never been in a situation like this. But, could have raised more money, could have knocked more doors, could have had more folks in. It was really just timing.
Yeah, I'm looking. Let me share my screen. I'm looking at least what's on Ballotopedia, and to your point, there was a lot of people on this ballot. And so the winner got 28% of the vote. It's not like it was some kind of landslide. Now in California, where I'm coming from, we use a top 2 primary system. And so it's an open primary, then the top 2 go to the general. You probably, if you were in our state, you would have been on the ballot most likely.
Yeah.
The other thing,
jungle primaries are king, right?
Yeah.
If we take that, I mean, if we had a jungle primary system, I would win that general election by a large margin.
Yeah. The other thing is if we were like Alaska and there was ranked choice, it could be that some of Portia, John, and Sherry's voters might have put you as their number 2 more so than putting Shree's as number 2.
Certainly the expectation. But what Alaska has Final Four voting, which is a really unique. So it's a combination kind of the California and the ranked. So they take top 4.
Yeah.
And then the top 4 candidates from a race get ranked choice. And so it's a really unique system. There is some veterans groups that are promoting what they call Final 5 voting. So what it would do is it would take the top 5 out of the primary, and then they would all go into the general. But that's all parties included. So right here, you only have Democrats. That would include, Republicans, Independents, Green Party, whatever. And so you'd only have 5 names on the ballot in the general election, and all of those would be ranked choiceable. And so it really would have changed the dynamics on a race like this, which is why ranked choice voting is so important. I introduced legislation in my first term to do ranked choice voting, and we'll bring it back in a couple of days when we get back into session here.
Yeah, the Final 5 movement is pretty cool. Hey, let's have open primaries, take the 5, and then do RCV in the general. Sounds like you kind of tried to make some inroads there in the state Senate. What were the biggest objections, and how do you plan to overcome them if you make another run at this?
Yeah, I think for a long time, Republicans have been of the mind that ranked choice voting helps Democrats. And I think the national landscape is showing that has not been the case, right? So the 2 biggest beneficiaries, I think, of ranked choice voting are 2 Republican U.S. senators, right? And not Democrats. And if they hadn't had ranked choice voting, maybe Susan Collins loses that seat in Maine 2 years ago. But in Michigan, there was a Republican who was running in a special election state house district who won a very crowded Republican primary and was like I don't even want to call him a Trumper, because he was crazier than that, right? Like Yeah, you're like, where is that zig at? Um, but he got denounced by all by a significant population of folks because he was on somebody's podcast and was I think they were talking about rape and incest and those kind of things, relative to abortion. And he was like, he tells his daughter something to the extent of, if you're getting raped, just enjoy it. And everyone was like,
Mm.
how do you? So they lost a safe Republican state house seat because he won a crowded Republican primary
Hmm.
and was completely unelectable in a general election, and probably couldn't have won a Republican primary one-on-one, but was able to get enough of that, slice in a crowded field. And so I think there are now more folks that see that ranked choice voting is not party specific. It doesn't help Republicans or Democrats. It helps good candidates and ensures that we get the best representative out of the space. I also firmly believe that it helps with institutions, right? So whether you be a party apparatus or a labor union or a business group, ranked choice voting allows you to really lean in and be helpful to the best set of candidates. I think it also minimizes negative campaigning, because if there are five of us
Hmm.
on the ballot and the two of us are calling each other both terrible people, then the person who's in third, or that third person who nobody's saying bad things about, people are probably going to say more nice things about them. And I think that helps clean up our politics in a real and measurable way.
Yeah, I could totally see that. I certainly in the private sector have worked in companies where they introduce like peer reviews as part of your performance review process, and it affects it in a good way. It makes people a little bit more collaborative, a little bit less
Mhm.
jerky, versus without having that feedback loop. So one thing about RCV, in my view, is it does tend to reward more moderate centrists or pragmatic, whatever word you want to call it, and it does not come at the to the advantage of people on the uh, ends of the spectrum, because they're the ones that are doing quite well in the current primary system, where if they rile enough of the super activated 10% of the party who are going to be in the primaries, like, they get a golden ticket and they can just keep getting reelected. And if the gerrymandering protects them, they just got to win the primary and then they're good to go. How do you, so I think part of the challenge for RCV is that the people that would benefit most, which I think is the majority of constituents, are
Mhm.
also the ones who are not on Twitter every day battling, the other side. They're just trying to like pay their bills and go to work and take care of their family.
Yep. I think though, I think what we think about moderate, I think people think about moderate and centrist like it's the blah space,
Mm,
right? I don't think that that is the case when we talk about ranked choice voting. Still, the candidate that people like the best are the ones that are going to win. And as we look out at our presidential elections, as we look out at statewide elections, it's not just the moderate candidates that win. In areas where the majority of people are moderate candidates can win. But when you still talk about, I mean, look at California. A California moderate is a liberal Arkan, Alabama, all day in a month of Sundays, right? Like, it's a
mhm.
very relative space along this spectrum. And what ranked choice voting does is it allows someone to get to 50%. And so it says you've got to go out and build a coalition that gets you above 50 in most of these spaces. And certainly that's not necessarily changing the primary electorate. So your primary electorate are always going to be the most engaged, most invested people. So that will always skew towards people who are, on the far left or the far right. But where the majority of people are in that space, it might be center right, it might be center left, it might be any one of those spaces. But ranked choice voting, I think, helps you get a real nucleus, and it makes you compete for everybody in ways that
Mhm.
haven't been the case in the past. And for people who are incumbents, I think ranked choice voting will make it easier for incumbents to remain in their space, because they'll have the name ID. They'll just have to build a base that is impactful to everybody.
Yeah. They'll definitely, I would imagine the incumbents would have to change their playbook, because what got them here wouldn't necessarily work as well in an RCV world. They would need to appeal to a broader group?
I mean, I think you're certainly right in that space. I think it's also important for us to recognize that the overwhelming majority of elected officials are not radically left or right. There are
Hmm.
certainly some, and those are the ones we spend all our time talking about. But the overwhelming majority of elected officials are somewhat more moderate than I would say probably the general public, because they have to appeal to both spaces in those things and operate in the space. I think we'll get not more moderate people or more center people. We'll get more people who are like the people that they represent. And in very rural communities where it's very conservative, that will be a more conservative person. In very urban places where they're super liberal, that'll be a more liberal person. But in places where it's a 50-50 or a toss, I think you're just going to get great candidates, right? Like you look at John Fetterman in
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
He's a super lefty guy, very progressive in a probably more conservative than not Pennsylvania space.
Hmm.
Able to, to rock it and roll it in a district where it mattered because people were like, I like that guy.
Hmm.
And that's what ranked choice voting gives you. It makes people say, who do I actually like the best? Not who is exactly like me.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about what's going on in your district in Detroit and that area these days. Like, what are some of the top priorities? And before we got started, I was saying, hey, California just passed a law after 2035 that you won't be able to buy a new gas car anymore.
Mhm.
It'll have to be EV. And I think there's a plant in your
Oh,
district
yeah,
that
yeah.
produces. Yeah.
Literally my first day in office. So I won a special election and a general election. My first day in office, General Motors announced that they were closing the GM Poletown plant, which
Mm.
was one of the largest employers in my district, and that was a pretty chaotic moment, right? Like, imagine your first day on the job and the thing that you need. You're like, oh yeah, we're gonna build, we're gonna bring manufacturing, we're gonna do all this kind of thing, and the exact opposite thing happens. You're like, oh, that's not good.
Yeah.
That is really bad. And
Yeah.
so the city manager in Hamtramck called me, was like, hey, Adam, what are you going to do? And I was like, what am I going to do? The president is talking about, like the president, the governor, like all of the people at every level all across the country who are talking about these other plants are just going in on General Motors. And so I called the former mayor of Detroit, Dennis Archer, and got his suggestion. He was like, call Carl Levin. Carl Levin was a longtime U.S.
Hmm.
Senator from Michigan. And he was like, first, do not accept that this plant is closing. You need to find the next product line. And I was like, okay, all right. And he's like, you need a meeting with the governor's office, all of the alphabet soup of our economic development agencies, the local folks, General Motors and UAW, and you need to have that meeting in the next 48 hours. And so my second day in the Senate, I'm running this meeting
Mm.
on the, in the Senate caucus room, Senate Dem caucus room, while I'm in lame duck session, trying to find a way to keep my plant open. And so we meet daily, till we meet weekly, till we meet month. Like we're meeting so regularly. And then they're like, all right, your plant's going to stay open. We're going to build an electric Hummer. And I was like, guys, if you're going to lie to me, maybe you can think up a better lie. The electric Hummer, right? Like the Hummer was what people drove when they wanted to say they didn't care about the environment and
Yeah.
global warming. But they're like, well, don't tell anybody. And so, of course, I didn't tell anyone because one, no one would believe me. But two, it's like, all right, cool. And so the new plant, the what they call now Factory Zero, which is going to be the future of General Motors EV space, is in my district, just a couple miles from my house. It was where President Biden announced the Build Back Better initiative, and I was sitting front row center because when everyone else was doing nothing, I was doing that work and making a difference. And so that was really impactful. And I'm really, grateful for the opportunity to have been able to tell that story and to talk about it. So, it was meaningful in the space. And I think as we think about where EVs are going, it's everything, right? And at the state level, I was really involved in some economic development incentives to get the battery plant production here in Michigan as well,
Mm.
because that's going to be the big part about where these vehicles are produced, right? It's not just where are they going to assemble the EVs, it's where the batteries being made. And so the EVs being made here with the batteries are going to make a huge difference, because the battery technology is really the key to EVs, right? Like as we talk about range, as we talk about building out the charging infrastructure, All of those things are going to be critically important. So I'm excited about California passing more laws to require EVs, and I'm excited
Mm-hmm.
about all of those EVs being produced here in Michigan, because that's going to make all the difference. I mean, Henry Ford's old house is just a couple blocks away from where I live.
Are they actually building electric Hummers in that factory, or are they building
Oh
other?
yeah, every Hummer you see riding down the street uh, is built right here in Detroit, and they're going to
Wow.
build the electric Silverado there. The F-150 Lightning is built just a couple miles away from us. Yeah, it's beautiful. And I don't know if you've
That
watched.
ain't no Prius.
Oh no, it's faster than just about any other car that you can drive, right? So you
Mm.
get in that electric Hummer and it will take off with any Corvette or Camaro or Mustang
Mm-hmm.
you got, because it's got instant torque. But it's got a huge engine and it does this weird like crab thing, so like it can drive sideways. It's an amazing vehicle.
Wow. Wow. Tell me a little bit about, I would imagine when you started that effort, you're like, well, they've already announced they're closing the plant. This is like a massive corporation. I'm a
Mhm.
state senator. I just got here. Like, how am I going to change that trajectory? And you also have the president doing everything they can. Like, what do you think was what was the moment where you were like, oh, like this could actually turn a little bit? Like, when did that tipping point start to emerge?
I never accepted that it wasn't happening, right? So after talking to Senator Levin, it was like, okay, we're just doing this, right? Like the
Hmm.
alternative never made sense, that they were going to close this plant. There was no plan B or plan C. It was just, we've got to keep this thing open, and working really hard to make sure that they put something back there. And so it was just keep working. I was like, hey, who do I, like, and talking to the first guy, they're like, nah, we can't. It's like, that's a deal. It's like, well, who's making that decision? And just working my way up the chain and saying, how do we keep this thing open? How do we keep going? What is it going to take to make this happen? And pushing that really hard.
Now, I would imagine there must have been some reason the original plan was to close the plant. And so they had to, the folks at GM had to change their mind. Did you need to provide like tax incentives, or how did you what was the pitch to get them to change course?
Well, so that plant is really historically significant, right? So it would have been, it's General Motors' only plant here in the city of Detroit. And so closing it would have been really impactful. It was a big promise to the community when they built it. It was, up until recently, the last factory built in the city of Detroit. Coleman Young, former mayor, really built it by sheer will. It was a space where they used eminent domain. And so it was a really impactful decision to put that plant there in the first place. General Motors world headquarters is in the city of Detroit. And so closing a factory here at in the home of the UAW in these spaces was really, a big thing and a big deal. And so we didn't have to give them a bunch of tax incentives to stay. We had to show that their workforce was right here. So the people who build vehicles and know how to do that are right here. And if they're going to make an investment and talk about the transition and the change, it should be in this space. And so they were excited about that. It certainly didn't help that Mayor Barra, the CEO of General Motors, used to be the plant manager at that factory and has nostalgia for that. And so, the old Detroit, what they call the DHAM or Detroit Hamtramck Poletown plant. And now it gets to be the flagship for innovation. And I think that was a very real story that could be told and has been being told, which is why when President Biden announced the Build Back Better initiative, he chose to do it there, because
Mm.
it was relevant as we talk about urban communities getting the kind of investment and not losing it to some of these spaces. Because certainly there are always this idea that, you go build a giant factory in a cornfield. Yeah, but nobody lives nearby. People aren't going to be able to get their own work. They're not going to be able to fill shifts. They don't have the infrastructure to put them on trucks to get them out. And all of those things were built up at that facility. And as we talk about the long-term planning on putting in the battery production spaces or the battery production spaces and to do all of those kind of things, it really just showed that it made sense to keep that investment.
Love it. Well, you came really close last primary, and these
Mhm.
congressional cycles they're only a couple years, so 2024 will be here before we know it. Are you planning to make another run at it? We definitely see that pattern where someone runs the first time, they get close, and then the second time they have a little more name ID and their game is a little more tuned up. Are you gonna continue to make that run?
Well, I'm not going anywhere. So I'm very committed to doing the work here in my community, in the district that I represent today, and to continue to work it really hard. I don't know if 2024 is there yet. What I've got to do is do the work necessary to make sure that if I'm on the ballot again, that I can win it. And so for me, my focus is on the November election. Michigan is a really important state. We've got a lot of things on the ballot, from the governor to the secretary of state to the attorney general. And for all of you who may or may not remember, Michigan was one of those states that it really came down to on whether or not President Biden got elected. And so we've got to make sure that we keep those folks in office. And I'm going to be squarely focused on helping them doing that. And if I can put it together in 2 years, I'll be back.
I'm guessing you're going to be back, and I hope you are. But we'll wait to see what you officially can announce later. Last thing before I let you, you never know, right?
I mean, it's all about infrastructure, right? Like that's the thing, right? Like, you talk about the serial entrepreneurs or people in these spaces. They have the great ideas. It's like, if someone will finance the idea, yeah, we're in, we're going to do it. And that's what it takes to run a congressional campaign, right? Like it just requires volunteers and money and resources and support. And if people are willing to get back and do that, then we can go do it.
Well, let me know when, if and when the time comes, and we'll get you back on the show and put the word out that Senator Hollier is ready to get back in the ring, and people can volunteer and donate and see if we can get you over the finish line. Tell me a little bit. Last question. Speaking of 24, a lot of people are saying that I think President Biden will run for re-election. Do you think there will be a competitive primary, or do you think it'll be pretty much kind of a fait accompli?
I think if President Biden runs for re-election, which I have every expectation that he will, I can't foresee a legitimate Democratic primary to unseat what I think will be a very popular Democratic president in President Biden. He's been very accomplished, has gotten a lot of really important things done over the last 2 years. I mean, even when you just look at Ukraine, right? Like no other modern American president has been able to so deftly navigate such an incredible conflict without engaging us in this space. And Ukraine is winning, right? Like as we talk about those spaces, has been able to do it. As we talk about the auto space, gas prices have gone down significantly over the last 6 months. And Republicans, you remember earlier in the year, we're talking about how they were going to run just on gas prices alone. So, well, that ain't a winning strategy today. President Biden's push on climate change, the infrastructure deal, I think in a year and a half, you're going to start to really see the impact of all the big change that has happened. I think, I'm a millennial, and I think people younger than me and my age are like, hey, we need this big change right now. It's like, yeah, all change starts with a couple steps. And I think people will really be able to see the benefit of those movements. I think it'll be hard for anybody to step out, especially in the Democratic side, and make a legitimate case that President Biden hasn't been doing the right things and that the country's not moving in the right direction.
Love it. Well, we hope to see you back in the Nerd Zone in the future, Adam. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you and learning more about you. And I really do hope we see more of you in the national scene. I think you're come across as a voice of reason and someone that just wants to get stuff done and is willing to kind of get move the chains and get the first downs. And that's what we need. We can't just always be battling each other and screaming at each other. So best of luck to you. And with that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
See you later, Adam. All right. What a cool dude. I like this guy. When he runs again, we'll definitely have to make sure he's listed on ofthepeople.us. If you found this conversation useful, can you do me a solid and like and share? And then in the comments, let me know if there are other public servants and candidates that you think are pretty cool that you'd like me to interview, Adam's I like that guy, and I'll be keeping my eye on him when he announces again, and hopefully we'll see him in DC doing pragmatic things and helping the country. People who help this channel are our channel members. So if you're on YouTube and you see that join link, that's how you can keep this content flowing and help cover some of the costs of running the channel from a software licensing and hosting fees kind of point of view. The biggest helper is Soldier One, who is a senior VP of the Nerds for Humanity movement. So thank you, Soldier One. You're awesome. And then we have VPs who are, in order of time as member, Kristen Slevin and Bike. So thank you, Kristen Slevin and Bike. At the hardcore level, we have Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Robert, Dean, Statner, Galessa, Jay Perrin, AH, Dana, Jason, Parth, Daniel, and Mickey. I should also say StreamYard helps makes this live streaming fees a little bit more possible. They actually granted us complimentary live streaming fees, so that's been great. And then at the verified level, which is $1.99 a month, cancel anytime. So your way of just helping support nerd content. Lisa, Albert, Brandon, Arez, Sophia, Doris, Emerald, Ben, Rasta, James, Emma, Elizabeth, Ira, Shoni, Jameson, Dr. William, Karen, Arden, Zemery, Mai, Brittany, Warren, Wana, Lucky, Kevin, Nell, Toby, Jeremy, David, Nicholas, and Mike. And overall, our oldest and youngest members. So our youngest members are Mickey, Mike, and David. Wow, and Nicholas, all less than 2 weeks old. So lots of new members joining. So thank you. Welcome. And then our OGs are Lisa Childress, Jean Lim, Kristen Slevin, Albert Tom, and Brandon David. Should I go all the way down to 32 months? Yeah, sure. Arez and David as well. And Sophia Chen and DK. So thanks to those members. And then let's see, we got some chat action here. Ira saying that he enjoyed the video. Yes, thank you. And I know it's a weird time, but I had to go when the guest was available. I'm not sure I would go so far as to say Ukraine is winning, but they're definitely doing better than anyone expected. Kevin is not. I think Kevin is being a little bit sarcastic. He says he has a long-term member sticking up the middle finger right now. I don't know. I mean, I guess I would wonder, Kevin, like what questions would you have wanted to ask? Like, I just wanted to get to know the guy, understand what he thought happened for his election, get his take on RCV, understand the kind of, that was a pretty cool thing, like turning around the GM plant closure. And then maybe if I wanted to get a debate with him, I probably could have pushed back on the Biden being the instant nominee, but I didn't really feel like that was the point of him coming on. I wanted to really learn more about him. But Kevin, as a member and viewer, I totally appreciate your perspective and respect it. One other thing I should call out are candidates that are on ofthepeople.us. So if you go to ofthepeople.us, it's kind of like Yelp for political candidates. And you right now can approval vote whoever you find most interesting, and it kind of moves them up in the trending list. Right now, we have Lanny Chen, who's a Republican running for California State Controller, as the top trending candidate. Also have Gary Voter, Matt Steiner, Jay Chen, Stephen Houlihan, Yulin Yo, David Kim, Amy Chai, John Fetterman. So check them out. You can sort by policy issue. You can sort by distance to, a given zip code. And then, You can see all the ordering change. Now we're looking at the East Coast candidates. And then you can filter by, people who support, let's say, Green New Deal, or you could do it by, UBI, whatever you want. So check it out. It's a project that's all volunteer powered and also powered by our Patreon supporters, 4 of the people. So I'm excited. We're working on some new features coming out soon around allowing Ask Me Anythings. Some of the Patreon supporters in order of amount of lifetime support are Eric Sanchez, Elizabeth O, Tony P, Rockout, Iggy C, Aaron S, John P, Rob, Timothy J, Jessica G, Trickle Up, Muhan Z, Travis C, Austin B, Mai Z, and Dylan J. So thank you to our ofthepeople.us supporters. And Kevin is saying, okay, yeah, not ask any tough questions. You're just a propaganda piece. He talked up the Ukrainian war and us spending large amounts of money. Yeah. Oh, I see what. So you're talking about the Ukraine stuff. Yeah, there will be times where we might want to get into a debate. In this case, I felt like he was talking about Ukraine, more around like what's Biden's case to get renominated. But, I hear you. Yeah, we could have pushed back. I don't know. With a brand new guest, and I reached out to him saying, hey, I want to learn more about you and your district and your run for Congress. Um, that's where we focused our time. But I know everybody has to get back to work, myself included. So thank you, nerds. Don't forget, like, share. And if you couldn't join and become a member, what you can do is you can like and share. That's free. And then leave a comment. Let me know who you'd like to see on the show in the future. I read all the comments and, check my comments daily. Keep it real. Bye, nerds.